72 hours before my wedding, my father looked me dead in the eye and told me he wasn't walking me down the aisle. I want you to understand something before I go any further. My father is not a man who says things lightly. Colonel Robert Whitfield, my father, 31 years in the United States Army, does not raise his voice, does not make idle threats, does not say things he doesn't mean. So when he stood in my kitchen 3 days before my wedding and said, flat as a briefing report, "I'm not walking you," I knew he meant it the way he meant everything, permanently. My sister was there too. Vanessa, my younger sister, the golden child of the Whitfield family, was leaning against my counter with a coffee mug in her hand and something close to satisfaction on her face. When I asked her, voice shaking, what I was supposed to do now, she just shrugged. "Go alone," she said. Like it was nothing. Like I was asking her what to order for lunch. I didn't cry in front of him. That's the one thing 30 years in that house taught me: you don't cry in front of people who are waiting for you to. I said okay. I said fine. And then I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed with my hands shaking, running through every version of my wedding day that didn't have my father in it. What neither of them knew, what nobody in my family knew, was that I had already made a call 3 weeks earlier. Just in case. Because I've spent my whole adult life learning that hope is not a plan, and that when someone shows you who they are, you build a contingency. So on the morning of my wedding, when the valet at the venue radioed ahead that a black government SUV had just pulled through the gate, and every man in dress uniform standing near the entrance snapped straight up and saluted before the door had even fully opened. My father was the last person in that courtyard to understand what he was looking at. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back. Not just 3 days. Years. I'm the older daughter. Growing up, that should have meant something, but in my house it meant I was the practice round, the one my father tested his expectations on before deciding Vanessa was the version worth investing in. He'd been an infantry officer before I was born, then spent the back half of his career in logistics command, and he ran our household the way he ran everything, with a clear hierarchy and very little patience for anyone who didn't fit into it cleanly. Vanessa fit. She married an officer at 24, moved base to base like she'd been born for it, hosted dinners for majors and colonels with the kind of effortless charm my father used to brag about at reunions. She was, in his words, a credit to the family. I heard that phrase more times growing up than I heard him say my name. I didn't fit, not the way he wanted. I went to law school instead of following anyone's script, and when I told him at 26 that I'd been commissioned into the Judge Advocate General's Corps, that I'd be defending soldiers, not marching alongside them, something in his face closed like a door. "So you're going to get criminals off," he said. That was it. That was his congratulations. He never once asked what my cases were actually like. He never asked about Specialist Reyes, 20 years old, wrongly accused of theft on a base in Germany, who I proved innocent after 3 weeks of digging through supply logs nobody else had bothered to read twice. He never asked about the 4 courts-martial I won that year, or the 11 soldiers who came up to me afterward and said I was the only person who'd actually listened to them. To my father, defense work was a stain, and no verdict was going to wash it out in his eyes. There was one person in my family who never made me feel like an outsider, my cousin Danny, who grew up 2 houses down from us and spent more holidays at our table than his own. Danny never cared what branch of law I practiced or what my father thought about it. Danny used to call me after every hard case, not to ask if I'd won, but to ask if I was okay. He was the one who drove 4 hours to sit with me the week I lost my first big trial. He was the one who, when I told him about the engagement, cried before I did. The night my father truly showed his hand was at my engagement dinner. 20 people, most of them military, his old command friends, a couple of active duty colonels he still golfed with. He stood up to give a toast, and I actually believed, for one stupid hopeful second, that he was going to say something kind. Instead he raised his glass, looked at my fiancée, and said, "Well, at least someone's finally going to keep her out of courtrooms defending people who don't deserve it." The table laughed, nervous, uncertain laughter, the kind that fills a silence nobody wants to sit in. My fiancé's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. I smiled because that's what you do. But something in me sat down that night and got very, very still. That stillness was the beginning of a decision I didn't fully understand yet. I started keeping a private accounting after that, not of grudges, exactly, but of moments. The dinner where he introduced Vanessa's husband by rank and title and introduced my fiancé as her teacher friend. The Christmas he asked Vanessa's kids what they wanted to be when they grew up and asked me, in front of everyone, when I was going to get a real career. Small deposits, each one, into a ledger I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with. What I did know was this: I had spent my whole career proving my worth to rooms full of strangers who owed me nothing, and I had never once needed my father's approval to win. I decided, quietly, that my wedding day was not going to be the one place I let his opinion of me write the story. If he wasn't going to walk me down that aisle with pride, I was going to walk down it with someone who actually understood exactly who I was. I thought immediately of General Marcus Coleman, a 4-star general I had represented 2 years earlier in the hardest case of my career, a court-martial that could have ended a 30-year career built on genuine honor over a charge that turned out, after 11 straight days of me not sleeping, to be built on a falsified report from a subordinate protecting himself. I won that case. I remember General Coleman shaking my hand afterward, his eyes wet in a way 4-star generals aren't supposed to let you see, telling me that if I ever needed anything, anything at all, I only had to ask. I hadn't asked, in 2 years. I don't like calling in favors. But 3 weeks before my wedding, sitting in my car in a parking lot after my father's engagement toast had finally stopped ringing in my ears, I picked up my phone and called his aide. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell Vanessa. I told exactly 3 people: my fiancé, my wedding coordinator, and Danny, who, when I explained the plan, went quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, "He's not going to know what hit him." I told him that wasn't the point. He said maybe it wasn't the point, but it also wasn't not the point. The plan itself was simple, almost anticlimactic in the planning. General Coleman said yes before I even finished asking, said it would be the honor of walking someone who'd once saved his name and his pension in the same breath. I gave the coordinator strict instructions: no names on the seating chart that would give it away, no mention in the program, no advance notice to my family. I wanted my father's refusal to stand exactly where he'd planted it, undisturbed, until the moment it collapsed under its own weight. For 3 weeks, I carried that secret like a stone in my pocket, heavy, but mine. Every time my father made another comment about how these things work out how they're supposed to, every time Vanessa asked, almost hopefully, who I'd found to walk me instead, I just smiled and said I had it handled. I did have it handled. They just had no idea how completely. The morning of the wedding was overcast, then clear by 10. My father showed up early, dressed sharp, shook hands with old military friends in the courtyard like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't detonated something in his own daughter's chest 3 days earlier. Vanessa found me in the bridal suite and asked, again, who was walking me. "You'll see," I told her, and something in my voice must have unsettled her, because she didn't push. At 11:40, a black government SUV rolled through the venue gates, flags on the hood, and the 2 off-duty colonels my father had invited, his old command friends, standing near the entrance in their dress uniforms out of respect for him, turned toward the sound of the engine out of habit more than anything else. Then the door opened. General Marcus Coleman stepped out in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars catching the noon light, a chest full of ribbons that told the story of 30 years most people would never fully understand. And every officer in that courtyard, every single one, including the 2 colonels my father had personally invited to watch him give away his daughter, snapped to attention and saluted before the man had taken 3 steps. I watched my father's face from the window of the bridal suite. I watched the exact second his expression cracked from mild curiosity into recognition, and then into something I had genuinely never seen on him before, something close to shame. He knew exactly who General Coleman was. Every officer of his generation did. And in that instant, he understood 2 things at once: who was about to walk his daughter down the aisle, and why that man had said yes. I came downstairs, And the general met me at the base of the staircase, offering his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Ready, counselor?" he asked, and I heard my father's sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind me. My father stepped forward. I could see the calculation happening in real time, the sudden scramble to reclaim a role he'd thrown away 3 days earlier. "I can still," he started. The general turned to him, calm and unhurried, the way men who have commanded thousands learn to be. "Colonel," he said, using my father's old rank with pointed precision, "your daughter asked me." I said yes before she finished the sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every colonel in that courtyard had already made their loyalty plain the moment they saluted, and my father, a man who had spent 31 years understanding exactly what rank and respect meant, understood, finally, completely, that he had lost something he could not talk his way back into. I have never in my life felt as certain of anything as I did walking down that aisle on the arm of a man who chose me not out of blood, but out of respect I had earned with my own 2 hands. Vanessa didn't smirk that day. I watched her face the entire ceremony, and for the first time in 29 years, I saw something on it that looked almost like humility. The reception was, without exaggeration, one of the best nights of my life. General Coleman gave a toast that had half the room in tears, telling the story of the young JAG officer who'd spent 11 sleepless days saving a man's honor because she refused to accept an easy, wrong answer over a hard, right one. "Danny cried again, second time that year," he told me later, "and both times because of me." My father sat near the back of the room for most of it, quiet, drinking slowly, watching. He found me near the end of the night, by the gift table, and started to say something about being proud. I let him get about 4 words in before I told him, gently but without softening it, that I didn't need him to be proud of me anymore. I told him I'd spent 30 years needing that from him and had finally stopped waiting for it to arrive. He didn't have a response to that. For a man who always had something to say, he had nothing. In the months since, my life has settled into something I genuinely didn't know I was allowed to have. My career kept climbing. I made senior defense counsel within the year, and General Coleman has become, unofficially, something between a mentor and family, calling every few months just to check in, no favors attached. Danny and I talk more than ever. He was the first person I called when the promotion came through, before I called anyone else. My father reached out a few weeks ago. A text, not a call, that told me plenty on its own. He said he'd been thinking about the wedding. Said he'd been wrong. Said he hoped we could talk. I read it twice, sitting in my office with a case file open in front of me, and I felt something I wasn't expecting, not anger, not vindication, just quiet. I texted back that I was glad he'd had time to think, and that I was open to a conversation when he was ready to have an honest one, not just an easier one. I never got the apology speech I used to imagine as a kid, the tearful, dramatic one where he finally says all the things I used to wait up hoping to hear. What I got instead was better, in its own strange way, proof. Proof that didn't need his permission to be true, standing in a courtyard in full dress uniform while grown men who'd survived wars snapped to attention for a fight I'd already won a long time before that morning. My father spent 31 years teaching soldiers that rank has to be earned. He just never expected to learn, in his own daughter's wedding courtyard, exactly how well I'd learned that lesson too. If this story hit home for anyone who's ever had to build their own worth from scratch because the people who were supposed to hand it to you never did, I see you, and I'm genuinely glad you're here. Drop a comment if you've got a story like this of your own, hit subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one.